Every year since 2007, the Sidney Hillman Foundation has given out the Saul Stetin Award for Labor History. This year, the judges were delighted to select as the winner Melvin Dubofsky, Distinguished Professor of History and Sociology Emeritus at Binghamton University, SUNY. Over the course of a long, distinguished career, Professor Dubofsky not only published one superb history of labor after another, but played a central role in creating labor history as a field of academic study. His first book, When Workers Organized, looked at the complex relations between labor, the socialists, and the progressive movement during that period of time when the garment unions won their first great victories. Just a year later, he published what remains to this day one of the greatest achievements of labor history, We Shall Be All, his magnificent study of the industrial workers of the world, the main source of information for students and unionists and activists about one of the most exhilarating organizations in the history of labor. Never one to shy away from big books about big subjects, Professor Dubofsky, working with Warren Van Tyne, then wrote the definitive biography of that great colleague and sometimes rival of Sidney Hillman's, John L. Lewis. Dubofsky demonstrated the breadth of his mastery of labor history, detailing the story of the larger-than-life Lewis as he went from being a coal miner to a union lobbyist to being the autocratic president of the United Mine Workers, and then in an amazing leap to be the founder, along with Sidney Hillman, of the Congress of Industrial Organizations, and being, during the years of the New Deal, the single person who more than anyone else represented the hopes and the triumphs of American workers. Professor Dubofsky then went on to tackle the history of the relationship between labor and government in his 1994 study, The State and Labor in Modern America. To have written one of these books would be considered a triumphant career. To have written all of them and much more is truly extraordinary. Melvin Dubofsky's contributions to labor history go well beyond his own scholarship. He was there at the very first meetings that planned what became Labor History, the first academic journal in the United States on the history of labor. He edited some of the first collections of labor documents made available on microfilm. It's a quaint phrase to remember microfilm. He actually taught one of the first courses on labor history in an American university. And he trained several generations of scholars who have gone on to be the leading historians of labor in the United States and Canada. It is no exaggeration to say that along with a small number of colleagues, including Stetin Award winners David Montgomery and David Brody, Melvin Dubofsky created the field of labor history in its modern form. It is with great pleasure that we give the 2011 Saul Stetin Award for Labor History to Melvin Dubofsky.
One of my first scholarly articles had as its core element the founding or creation of the Amalgamated Clothing Workers of America and Sidney Hillman's role in that. In a book I've written, one that Josh did not mention, and one that perhaps I'm not most proud of, but one that probably has sold the most copies, the epigraph before the penultimate chapter is taken from a letter that Sidney Hillman wrote to Phil when she was still an infant. I also had two of the most productive interviews I've ever had with labor leaders, with two former officials of the Amalgamated Clothing Workers, Joseph Schlossberg, who was the secretary-treasurer in the early years, and Jacob Potofsky, who succeeded Hillman as president. And when I was a young graduate student doing considerable research at the old Tamiment Library, which was then at 7 East 15th Street in what had been the old Rand School and People's School before that building, I became acquainted with J.B.S. Hardman, who could be called the in-house intellectual of the Amalgamated. And I probably learned more about labor from a variety of informal conversations with Hardman than with anyone else. And I'm also particularly honored to be among the company of such previous recipients of this award as David Montgomery, Jim Green, and Dorothy Sue Cobble. I think they are among the best scholars in the field, and I am proud to be grouped among them. And I should admit also that with at least 3 of them, I have a very long and complicated and productive history and acquaintanceship. I still remember when Jim Green was a graduate student at Yale, and I was a young faculty member at the University of Massachusetts, and he wrote me a letter asking for advice about research he was engaged in, and sort of bemoaning why could Yale not have a labor or social historian like me. That's before David Montgomery went to Yale. And finally, I won't say much about it, but I have a connection with Bruce Rayner when he was an undergraduate student at the New York State School of Industrial and Labor Relations at Cornell. And Alexandra asked me to be brief, so I'm going to close and ensure brevity. And thank you all for being here. And the Hillman Foundation